Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Leaders Podcast, part of the Jobs with Impact compendium of resources for people who want to make a positive impact on the world. I'm David Rosenheim, your host. Every episode, we bring you in-depth conversations with people who are leading the way to a sustainable future. I hope these conversations will be as inspiring to you as they are to me. And most of all, I hope that they'll empower you to take action. The planet needs you. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to jobswithimpact.com. Please help us to spread the word by taking a minute to rate and review the show in iTunes and by telling your friends and colleagues. Hi, everyone. In this episode, number 18, we feature a conversation with Emily Reichert, CEO of Greentown Labs. We're putting this one back to back with last episode's interview with Matt Peterson, CEO of LACY, the LA Clean Tech Incubator. I was interested in exploring the role of these accelerator incubators in the development of new clean technology innovations that are powering our transition to a low-carbon future. Both Emily and Matt have unique insight into the sorts of career opportunities these new technologies represent. I believe that we must and will innovate our way out of the climate change conundrum, and these and other incubators play a vital role. Dr. Emily Reichert has been at the helm of Greentown Labs in Somerville, Massachusetts since 2013. She has overseen the growth of Greentown to become the largest clean tech startup incubator in the United States, with over 170 companies incubated and $320 million in funding raised. These companies run the gamut, from robotics and process efficiency to advanced materials to agriculture, water, and waste. Emily has a background in green chemistry and the commercialization of many beneficial technologies. At Greentown Labs, she has broken ground in developing innovative partnerships between early-stage startups and industry-leading corporations. She holds a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Wisconsin at Madison and earned her MBA as a Sloan Fellow at MIT. Well, Emily Reichert, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, I'm very excited to be here.
So we're talking from different sides of the country. I assume you're at work at Greentown Labs.
I am at work at Greentown Labs. In fact, I'm sitting in a call room in our headquarters, which is also the Global Center for Clean Tech Innovation here in Somerville, Massachusetts.
Well, I can't wait to hear more about Greentown, and I have a bunch of questions for you about that. But I want to start kind of at your beginning and just kind of get a sense of how you came to this. I know that you're from Arizona. Where in Arizona are you from?
The Phoenix area, actually. I was raised in Tempe, Arizona.
And what was your upbringing like? Did you have a sense of kind of environment and environmentalism back then, or did that come later?
No, I think that where I am now is actually probably a reaction to how I grew up. I would say I had a pretty average suburban upbringing. If you know the Phoenix area at all, you know that you really can't get anywhere without a car. And so that means going to the grocery store, getting a coffee, anything you're doing, you're talking about at least a mile. And, now that I live in a place that is very, densely populated and compact, I just really value the ability to walk to the end of my block and get to a grocery store or a dry cleaner, or, it's just very different than what I grew up in that area. And so, I guess that I came to this later in life, but I think it was definitely shaped by the idea that, there really wasn't any public transit options. There was a bus, no one rode the bus,
Right.
but there was, cars and more cars. And that's kind of how you got around. And you also kind of lived far apart from one another. And so it wasn't, very different than kind of the urban environment that we're here in today here at Greentown Labs and that I live in here in Boston.
And I understand that your dad was a physician and that he encouraged your interest in science. Talk to me a little bit about sort of that advice that he gave you early on and kind of your relationship to science at the beginning.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, especially because if you haven't noticed the girl, a woman now, of course. But to have a dad who, my dad was kind of a quiet guy, and he didn't say much. So when he said something, it really would stick with me. And so there was a few pearls of wisdom along the way that I always brought along. And, one of them was basically when I was trying to decide what to major in college. He said, if you do science and engineering, you'll always have a job. And then when I graduated from college, summa cum laude, and he wrote this on the garage door of our house in chalk and like colored letters. And this was so uncharacteristic for my dad. So you just have to manage this very quiet guy, very under the radar, suddenly like bursting out there with all this color of chalk. Anyway, he said, you'll always have that. You can take it with you. And so I think those two messages that, as a woman, I can do this. This makes sense. This is going to give me a path to the future is a message that I took with me. There was never any like, you can't do this or you're a girl or anything like that. My dad, said that to me loud and clear. And, I don't think it mattered either way what sex I was.
And you went on to study chemistry. What sparked your interest in chemistry specifically?
It's funny. When I look back over my path, I feel like there's a couple common themes. And one I've talked about in a presentation I give at a TEDx Somerville a couple years ago, but it's kind of the search for people and community in the sciences. And I can get to that in a minute, but it's also seeking challenges. And I think maybe some people would avoid certain things because it's hard. For me, somehow I'm always wanting to do the thing that's super hard for me. And I don't quite know why that is. I'm just built that way. And so my only C in high school was chemistry. I don't know that had anything to do with it. But then when I went to college, I started out, my dad's a physician. I'm like, okay, science, engineering. All right, I'll be a doctor. Yay. Actually, my mom's a therapist. And so then between therapist and physician, I was like, okay, great. I'll be a psychiatrist. That was my only idea. So I started taking science and biology and chemistry. And biology, I just felt like it was kind of about memorizing frog bones. And I was really good at memorizing. So there was really no challenge there. It's dissecting things. And while that was cool, I don't know. I think that biology at that point was not as well known on the molecular level, and this was 20 something years ago, as it is now. And so you'd have on the chalkboard, blob eating blob. And I found that was kind of unsatisfying. But the chemistry, you could really know what was going on at a molecular level, and you could figure it out with mathematics. And it was much more satisfying to me. So I never thought that I would go into chemistry particularly, but that was the way I was drawn. And along the way, I had a really great mentor. Her name was Dr. Barbara Murray. She was this character, short, blonde, bleach blonde hair, smoked little tiny cigarettes, and swore profusely in the classroom. F this, F that. And that was my organic chemistry professor. And she was just so beloved by all the students. I mean, the swearing was just that's so cool. I don't know. But really, she took me under her wing and she said to me, she was the first person, have you ever thought of going to graduate school in chemistry? And of course, no. No one in my family had done that. But she took me under her wing and I did research with her and then at Argonne National Laboratory in the following year. And that kind of put me on my path to graduate school in chemistry. At which point, I remember I went to my brother's high school graduation. I went back to that high school teacher in chemistry and said, hey, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to graduate school in chemistry. And I think I just knocked her socks off. That was Mrs. Steck or Ms. Steck, I think. And so, it's interesting to be drawn to what's next and, feel like you have to, I don't know, make that challenge or meet that challenge.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my son who earlier he's in 8th grade and he always really loved science until this year. And he's, just pulling his hair out and getting a C+ currently. And he's really frustrated. And I'm hoping that his love for science kind of comes full circle and that he's not discouraged.
Oh, great.
Now, what were you specifically exploring? You did your PhD in chemistry at UW-Madison, not too far from where I am today. I'm actually in Chicago. What did you do your research in? What were you working on?
So my research was really kind of fundamental science. I was doing physical chemistry, and that is basically chemistry from the perspective of molecules and atoms, and understanding how things work at that level, which again was very satisfying to me to be able to kind of break things down and really understand how things work. It was also interesting because it had all kinds of cool tools associated with it. So I got to play with lasers and gas chambers and spend time in the machine shop because my experiment was a gas phase physical chemistry experiment that involved shooting ions at a stream of hydrocarbons, and then they would come together and form a complex that would then blow apart. And I built an imaging apparatus that would look at those molecular complexes breaking apart and measure the amount of energy that involved. And that was important because, as you may know, catalysts, which basically make many reactions, chemical reactions, happen faster and with less energy, are something that's very important to a lot of different industries. And so, anytime you need to break apart a bigger hydrocarbon molecule, like in the case of a fuel, you might start out with something that's like 18 carbons long and you need to break it to 8 carbons long. So you use these kind of metals or catalyst materials to make those reactions possible. And so what I was trying to understand was basically the energy that it would take for one single metal ion, so not a whole surface or a whole catalyst, but one ion inserting in the bond of one of those molecules that needed to be broken up. And so that was what my research was about, was trying to understand those very fundamental measurements, because then what you could do with that information is use it to tweak models. Because at this time, this was still kind of the early days of doing chemistry using, bigger and bigger computers. And so you really need to have kind of empirical data, so to speak, to help tune models to make them better able to predict what's going to happen. And so very fundamental research, but really trying to understand, how these catalytic reactions could be done. Once you could model them by a computer, you can do many, many combinations and possibilities all very quickly using computing power rather than having to do a whole bunch of reactions in a laboratory. So that's kind of the overview. And along the way, I got to play with these cool tools, like I said, and spent a lot of time in the machine shop at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Always loved the machine shop guys. They were just kind of my go-to people. And it's funny, I spent a lot of time, making flanges and machining different parts under their guidance. And, today I run an incubator, which has a machine shop on site. So it's kind of like hearkening back to this early days where that was part of my PhD thesis.
Yeah, and I imagine that the foundational chemistry work that you did informed your work in green chemistry a few years later as well. So coming out of Madison, you worked for a consultancy, for technical consultancy, Arthur D. Little. And my understanding is that you then took a senior role in a spin-out that was helping new technology and science startups commercialize their work. Talk to me a little bit about that. And it seems like that was also a real foreshadowing of some of the work that you're doing now at Greentown Labs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's many different outcomes from a graduate degree in chemistry. A lot of people decide to go into academics. For me, it was pretty clear to me that I was not made for being in a lab, kind of on my own doing research. I really was always feeling the need to interact with other people and was doing all these extracurricular activities that my professor was kind of like, why am I doing that? Because really I should have been focusing all my time on papers if I was going into academics. So went to industry. As you mentioned, started with a firm that was doing consulting, basically using my chemistry skills and working with other scientists and engineers to solve problems for large industrial customers and also for government. And so we would kind of put together crack teams to do either brainstorming or solve a problem that might be happening with a particular product, or work on that product to make it more, better, faster, cheaper, cost effective. And I started realizing that, along the way, I was helping this company as a consultant, doing lab work, but also doing a lot of kind of brainstorming and developing new intellectual property work. And I kind of got to the point where I was thinking to myself, this isn't necessarily getting me out of bed every morning to use. I've had all these years of training now. I mean, by the time that I did finish my PhD, I was 27. So it's like most of your life is spent in school. And then what impact am I really having? And I kind of an existential questioning of my career and what I was doing. And someone at that time introduced me to the concept of green chemistry. And that really opened a whole new world for me, because I realized that was something that I could do with the skills that I already had, and the knowledge and the training and the energy and the ability to kind of manage people and teams and direct it towards something that was going to have kind of a bigger impact than helping one company earn an incremental additional profit, which is kind of what an employee does in most companies. So I found first of all, was able to help form a group within my consulting company that was just focused on green chemistry. And that's really making products and processes more environmentally friendly. But then along the way, met someone who was starting their own firm that was just going to focus on that. And so jumped ship to be part of building that company. And it really was a pretty cool experience in multiple ways. One was I got to do something that I felt was impactful every single day. I mean, we were helping to do everything from cleaning up how you make carbon black, in printing inks, to what materials are in nail polish. It'll cure you from wearing nail polish if you really know what's in there. Plastics too. Have never used a plastic dish, put it in the microwave since. Green chemistry will definitely teach you what's going on. But in any case, really had the experience of using my chemistry for impact, but then also of building a company. I was an early employee in this company and helped build it to 40 people as a senior manager in the company for basically in a 2.5-year period. And that really gave me the entrepreneurship bug, at which point I went back to school to get an MBA, and really at that point was looking to build or join another company that would be having a positive impact on the environment.
So you went to, this was at MIT, you were a Sloan Fellow. And so you went to business school with sort of a clean tech or green chemistry or with environmental impact in mind. Was that part of your intention at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like I had the ability and interest and drive to really lead or start a company that would be based on, probably an MIT spin-out technology, and that was, of interest to me while I spent the year there getting my PhD or my MBA. And so I was meeting with different faculty members and trying to learn about different technologies and what their impacts were. And of course, I started out from the chemistry perspective, but realized just how much was going on in the clean energy arena during my year at MIT, and really got attracted to that as an area that, with my technical background plus a business background, I could potentially have a big impact in an area that was already having a lot of momentum and a lot of interest from a lot of different parties. So I felt like that was a place I could have an impact.
Let me just pause for a second, because I get asked this question too. I went to business school as well, and I've started a couple of companies, and I've sometimes get asked, well, did going to business school help inform your entrepreneurship skills? And I kind of, my general answer is not really. It certainly helped my network, and I learned a lot of things about business, a lot of gaps I had. But what's your take on that? Was the MIT Sloan experience something that, what did you take from that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that you learn to be an entrepreneur in school.
Right.
Definitely not. I think you have a drive to do it. You learn from being part of a company that is growing really quickly. But for me, the business school thing was really about learning a language. And that language was early stage finance. It was accounting. It was all the kind of marketing and HR and operations type of things that I had, as a manager and a leader in a company, been exposed to, but didn't really have, the language or the kind of background or credibility, when speaking about those topics. So for me, it was like just kind of a crash course in business. And then the other really valuable part of it was, at MIT, there's just so many startup companies spinning out all the time, and so many interesting technologies that you just get awash with this wave of, possible different pathways that you can take. And so for me, it was, they always say it's about the network. I'd say it in a different way. It's kind of about the opportunities that surround you when you're in this kind of environment. And so now, with the technical background plus the business language, I was, I think, better prepared to take advantage of opportunities that were around me in this environment.
So did your introduction to the people that were working on sort of the first version, the first manifestation of Greentown, come while you were still at school, or did it come once you had left? Tell me a little bit about sort of that genesis.
So I met the founders of Greentown Labs, and these were entrepreneurs, most of whom had graduated from MIT and had found a warehouse and then subsequently a basement in South Boston to build their companies, because they were looking for a way to share space at a cost-effective rate. So they were together for, I'd say, maybe 6 months or so. And by that time, they had realized that there was something there beyond just like, let's share rent, guys. They were helping one another set up Department of Energy budgets, because one had done one, so the next one could benefit from that. They were teaching each other QuickBooks. They were sharing test rigs. They were sharing interns. And so there was a lot of value created in that community of like-minded people who were all building startups in the clean tech arena. And so I wandered in, I think about a year into this endeavor, which at that time was already called Greentown Labs. It was really kind of an interesting experience. So I networked my way to it. Someone told me, hey, you're looking to grow or be part of a clean tech startup, and you got to go check out. There's a bunch of guys in a basement in South Boston. Like, you should see what they're doing, this Greentown Labs thing. So I just networked my way there and met with some of the founders. And, I walked into that place, and this was before South Boston kind of caught on fire as a new hot destination for big company innovation, which it is today. And so there were, a few buildings that were a little bit derelict, I'd say. Certainly the one that we were in, it had, it was really a turn of the century kind of factory building that really had been underutilized for many years. It had this basement with a big loading dock. And, frankly, I'm not sure it was actually legally occupied space, but, no one asked any questions. And if you opened the doors,
Right,
that was ventilation. And so, and then it had this wonderful, open space. And this was where the entrepreneurs were at work. And they were building these prototypes. There was like high altitude wind turbines, and there was this big engine, compressor that was in a basement, in the sub basement, and there were devices and things kind of all over the place. And then there was people, and they were actively buzzing in a hive of activity when I first visited. And I walked in there, and two things that have really struck me. One is, having been in a corporate environment for many years, it's like, oh my God, this place is a death trap. There's no way that this would be legal. I mean, like sawdust on the floors and like hand railings that were, kind of this sketchy. As I already said, no ventilation unless you open a window. And then the other impulse I had was, oh my God, this is amazing. I love this. The energy of these entrepreneurs, you could just kind of feel it. And that is something that I think people always say, even to this day. Greentown Labs is 100 companies, from those original 4. And there's still people comment on that to me, that when they walk into our space, they feel that energy and that kind of, it's an excitement or a buzz or a passion. I'm not sure how it originates, but I felt it on that very first day that I walked in, and I was starting to talk to these folks who were really the original 4 founders. They were each running their own companies. It was getting to the point where it was kind of too big. It was growing from the original 4 to maybe 12 to 15 founders who were all sharing this space in South Boston. And so they were looking for someone to kind of help them out and take it to the next level. And I was finishing up my degree at Sloan, hadn't really found yet what I wanted to do next. Spent basically a summer in a venture capital firm, and I realized I really fit better on the side of the entrepreneur, and that's a longer story for another time. But went traveling for a little bit, and then I just came back to Greentown Labs again. I think just drawn to the energy and the people there, and said, well, hey, can I just work out of here while I figure out what my next job is? And little by little, I just kept getting sucked into it. I helped. They needed to move out of the basement space because that was soon the building was going to be sold, and there wasn't really another option, and we needed to figure this out. And, so developing a business plan for that, thinking about, okay, what are we going to need? Oh, we're going to need legal services. Should we get someone to sponsor that? What are we going to need to help this business grow beyond where it is today? And that just was very attractive to me. I was kind of at a point in my life where my husband and I agreed, well, if you're ever going to be entrepreneurial, probably the year after you do this Sloan program is the year. So, he was gainfully employed. I was lucky in that sense. And so I jumped on board. In February of 2013, I signed on as the CEO of Greentown Labs, and it was not a paid resource for over a year.
I've been in that situation a couple of times myself. So what was that process like? I mean, I imagine you sort of hitting the ground and either writing or rewriting a business plan and developing a pitch and taking it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the very beginning, I guess I felt like there was, for lack of a better way to say it, really good fodder, good feeling about this community and what people were doing, and that there's something not quite to sell there, but that people would believe in and feel passionate about. And so in some ways, the entrepreneurs at Greentown Labs, and this is still true today, sell themselves by what they do and the passion with which they do it. And that's evident when you walk in, when you talk to them, when you are on a tour. And so I think, relatively speaking, I had an easier job than maybe other people that are trying to build an organization like that, because I had something to show from the very beginning. You could take people on a tour, and I did that with basically our first and early partner. We had a state partner, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, that got behind us fairly soon on. And then we also landed in a city that's right outside of Boston, Somerville, Massachusetts. I was lucky to be introduced to the mayor's office there, and that first meeting led to a tour of the mayor himself and his economic directors. I brought them over to Greentown Labs. They met with 7 of our entrepreneurs, and by the end of the meeting, the mayor was basically said, let's make this happen. And the next thing I knew, there was, funding that was going to be available, which helped us get other funding. And, by that time, it was getting ready to the point where we were almost getting kicked out of our new space, but somehow had to figure out how to move the 25 now companies that were part of this community to a new home. We kept, I think, most of them. I think actually there's 28. We kept 25 out of 28. Boston is pretty compact. So when you're talking about moving from one city to the next, you're really talking about 5 miles or something. But 5 miles is still a big deal when you're used to this original location and what was special about it. And it was an old brick and beam building. And now we were kind of moving to outer urban core into Somerville, Mass. So really in the early days, it was about building partnerships with the city and the state. And then from there, then corporate partners were interested in getting involved as well.
And I want to talk to you about that because you've done a lot of innovation in bringing and creating these partnerships between startups and corporates. But I want to talk a little bit about I want to understand the kind of the infrastructure, right? So from the first or maybe I guess second version of Greentown Labs out of the basement into your first abode when you joined into this new facility, what kind of went into your thinking about what you needed to provide physically in terms of physical infrastructure for the types of startups that you were to house?
So we had a great example of this, slightly as is, maybe not quite legal space in South Boston to build from. And so I could see what the basic needs were. And frankly, if you're prototyping, if you are building a physical product that needs to be tested and you just need space to do that in, your needs are pretty straightforward. You need a space. Typically, a cement slab will do it. Usually, you need to have heavy things be able to be held on that slab. You need electricity. You need to have some semblance of security. And surprisingly, the privacy issue has been less of an issue as we have very open lab space. We both had it in South Boston. We have it here in Somerville. We actually have taped lines on the floor between companies, and that works most of the time. Every once in a while, someone needs to do something that's more private, and they put up, different barriers to hide what they're doing, but those tend to be more temporary. So you need this kind of open lab space. What you don't need is a lot of it right away. And so if you're a company that's 2 or 3 people, what you need initially, and most entrepreneurs who come to us need 100 square feet. Now, if you need help understanding what size that is, it's like a big closet.
It's pretty small. Yeah.
It's very small, but you're never going to find that on the open market, right? And so you're going to end up paying you need 100, you're going to pay for 3,000. Like that's the smallest increment of space you can get on the open market. So it's small spaces. It's also the resources that are shared amongst the entrepreneurs. So one thing that this happened from the beginning was shared resources and tools. And we built up over the year a machine shop, an electronics shop, also, different types of test equipment that's available for rental from one of our partners. So you need kind of some shared equipment because the early things that entrepreneurs should be spending money on are their team and their prototype. And so if you can avoid costs of having to buy equipment or buy software or buy things that really could be shared amongst multiple companies, that's a huge benefit. And that was also there from the very beginning. So the needs are relatively simple, but when we looked to build out, which was our first space in Somerville, Massachusetts, really what we got was just a big open warehouse. That's what it started with. It basically had no walls. It was a 33,000 square foot cement slab. And we built it, we basically put one big wall and a couple conference rooms in there to separate lab from office. We left the office space, in addition to lab space, very open. And that's, again, reflecting our space that we had in South Boston, where what I loved is, and I was there late at night, so I knew this happened. You're there 8 o'clock at night, then you're there 10 o'clock at night, then it's 11 o'clock at night. And you can see another entrepreneur sitting on the other side of the room, also there at 11 o'clock at night. And so you have this kind of common, I'm not crazy feeling, and you can meet each other in the kitchen and, sure, maybe you're not drinking coffee at that point, but you know that someone else feels as passionate about what they're doing as you feel. And so having that open environment was something that we wanted to create in the office space as well in Greentown Labs. And then you can always go to a conference room to have a private meeting, but being able to see across an expanse and have that openness was very important to us.
And talk to me a little bit about the model to the extent that you can. You're providing infrastructure. I know that you have partnerships that sometimes award funding. Does Greentown take equity in the way that, that like a Y Combinator or some of the tech incubators do? Or how does the kind of partnership model work with your startups?
So for us, because we were founded by entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs don't want to give up equity. We were founded with a model that was mission based, and we've kept it that way over the years. We're a public benefit corporation, as well as a 501c3 nonprofit. We kind of have two arms within the overall Greentown community here. And the reason for that, again, is really that's what the entrepreneurs who started it was really more of a collective at the beginning. And so they wanted to build a culture of supporting one another, of community. And that's something that, when I took over as the leader, I thought was a very special and precious thing to have these people that are going through it's so hard what they're doing. It's so risky. And to have people that can empathize and sympathize and be going through the same thing or about to go through the same thing and sharing that information and sharing stories and opportunities with one another. Once you start doing the funding part of it, then you're creating more of a competitive culture. And so that's something that we've really, I can see maybe some ways that you could do that in the future, but I think we're really proud of the community here and the willingness of entrepreneurs to help each other, even as we've scaled. And you just see little incidences of that every day. An entrepreneur will reach out on our internet and say, I'm about to get my first term sheet. Can someone, tell me what I should be expecting or what terms to pay attention to? And then suddenly, you have 6 responses within the CEO group on the internet system. So those type of things I think are magical. And, I've always worried that if you go to the model where everyone's trying to kind of please us because they need more money out of us, then you kind of lose that.
Yeah, it's sort of the, intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards. And you risk losing the intrinsic when you start to emphasize some of the extrinsic. Is there any sort of formalized coaching or mentorship that you provide in addition to the physical space?
Yeah, so we think about what we offer as really being a couple things. Our mission is to provide entrepreneurs with the community, the resources, space, and the connections that they need to thrive. And so we've talked about the community and we've talked about the space. Resources are really shared resources, and some of which I've mentioned, machine shop, electronics shop. We now have a chemistry lab. We have a rooftop testing lab. We basically have in the things that entrepreneurs need early to be sharing, where they can save the resources and put them into their prototypes and their people. Beyond that, there's the connections. And we really see the entrepreneurs as needing a lot of different types of connections within an ecosystem that we're lucky to have here in the Boston area. First and foremost, there's investors, right? You need to have different kinds of investors at different times. You might need angel and seed when you're early. Eventually, you're going to need venture. You probably also want to be interacting with corporate investors a lot of the time because, frankly, most of the innovations in this area, you're going to need a corporate partner to help you scale it. And so those interactions are kind of another area in which we really focus on providing connections and support. Then we're also very close to our state government and provide a lot of helpful office hours and whatnot on how to do grant proposals and things like that. And that's another thing that's really shared among the community. We're super good at getting certain types of state grants at this point within our community because there have been so many members of the community that have got one of those grants before. So that kind of knowledge, we help to facilitate the spreading of it. We work with a lot of other startup support organizations who can provide things that are complementary to us. Universities are another kind of source of ideas, but also, great sources of talent. So we have an annual internship fair that we invite all the local universities to, students who want to have internships in clean tech. Then our members kind of all line up and are ready to be sharing the job descriptions. And so we really think of ourselves as kind of pulling all of these resources together in a way that makes it much easier for our entrepreneurs to access vetted resources or vetted connections. And that just, again, it saves them time, it saves them money. And we also do it for professional services. So we have people on site on a regular basis that are providing help with marketing, with HR, with PR, with accounting or finance. You kind of name it, like all the things that a small business needs. We try to provide that somewhat on an ad hoc basis at this point, though we're thinking about being more programmatic going forward. But basically, we're trying to make it easy and fast for you to get the information and the connections that you need that have been pre-vetted. So that's really what we try to do.
It sounds like a great set of resources, something that I could have used at various points in my career. I'm curious as to what sort of the mix, technology-wise, sector-wise, looks like, and maybe you could tie that to what sort of trends you see. I'd like to kind of get into a conversation around jobs and opportunities and what you see kind of emerging now and how that might be reflected in kind of the mix of technologies and startups that you have at Greentown Labs.
So the mix of startups at Greentown Labs, is quite broad because for us, the way that we define clean tech is essentially doing more with less. And so if you are making a process more efficient with a new manufacturing technology, even around robotics, that is going to come within our clean tech focus. Of course, the traditional, people think of clean tech as clean energy. They think of wind and they think of solar, but there's also energy storage. There's technologies that help with energy distribution. There's different kinds of generation besides wind and solar. There's efficiency in all of that generation. There's also agriculture, waste, water, transportation, and things related to transportation, EV charging and the different software and services and support that goes with that. So we really span a broad range of technologies. I'd say that the commonality of our entrepreneurs is wanting to solve a big problem and typically doing it with a hardware, but probably a software as well, solution. And so that is really kind of the portfolio that we have here at Greentown Labs.
Is there a formula for that? You're looking for, a certain allocation on storage and a certain allocation on grid optimization, or is it really, you're really just looking at the quality of the idea and the team behind it?
So our application process is a kind of multi-level process that is both of our team and our board is involved. And we're looking for a couple different things. At the outset, we're looking more for kind of stage, which we accept companies that are basically seed to Series A investment. So they've raised some money, but they're trying to probably raise, 5 to 10 million as a goal in the next year or two. Then we also look at, the clean tech fit. It's interesting the number of companies who will come to you and try to make a case for why they're clean tech because they want to be part of the community here. But, again, we're broad, but we definitely want to make sure that we keep our like-minded community of folks that are kind of fighting all for to address the same challenges. We also look at, conflicts. So are there companies that are very similar, same market, same technology that would create a problem with our open environment? And we've had to come up with some creative solutions, putting companies in different buildings as we've grown because there's just more of them now. And so it's more likely that there's going to be conflicts. We like to, the technology, we trust someone really who's outside of Greentown Labs to help us vet that, but sometimes we call on our member companies to help with that as well. So we like to see companies who have already gone through an accelerator program like Y Combinator or Techstars, or have won as a grant from the state or at the federal level, or has received some seed funds or have won a competition, someone else typically has done some vetting on the technology and the team before they even get to us. And that's what we like to see before that. And then in terms of technology and which companies get in, we don't really have a particular target in terms of we want more wind companies or we want more solar companies. It really goes in trends, and we see waves of companies. Right now, we're really in an ag wave, anything to do with agriculture, especially as it relates to Internet of Things. But we also have LED lighting related companies. So that's a real trend right now. Earlier on, there was a trend around robotics, a lot of manufacturing efficiency technologies in the last year. Before that, there was a trend in water and water innovations around, both delivery of water, but also around purification. So what we see is that there tend to be trends in waves, and I imagine that's probably driven a little bit by interest. Most of our companies come from a university environment, but it's also probably driven by what investors are interested in at this moment. And so you might have a technology that could be a platform technology that could go in multiple different directions, but the investors they're talking to are really encouraging them to, that can apply to. And so that can also help push a technology in a particular direction.
So since, a startup by its nature isn't going to have a big staff, they might be looking for interns, they might be hiring their first employees. What advice do you have for people that are interested in working for an early stage clean energy, clean tech startup? How do they find these jobs and where might they look?
So I would look to, an organization that has the opportunity to work with a lot of startups. So, we would be an example in our area, but, same with the government agency that is at the state level, which for us is the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. There's one in New York that's it's called NYSERDA. California has the California Energy Commission. So these organizations tend to have job boards. Incubators tend to have job boards. Organizations that are kind of conveners of an ecosystem tend to have job boards. So I think that would be a pretty easy place to start in terms of just trying to understand what kind of jobs are out there. Then the next level down would be going and getting out there and interacting with the ecosystem. 9 times out of 10, if people say, I want to get to know what's going on in clean tech because I want to get a job in clean tech, I'm like, here's the next 3 events you need to go to. Because that is really where you meet people and you meet startups and you meet bigger companies and you understand kind of what the trends are. And you start to build your network in the area and the network in the ecosystem, because we're working in an area that, from various directions is under fire. We're working in an area that's very difficult. It's technically difficult. We as people within the ecosystem of clean tech and clean energy, we tend to kind of have each other's backs and we tend to look out for each other and we tend to try to introduce new people into the community and help them. And so starting to build the network is, I think, the most important thing that people can do. And so I will always encourage them to go to, we have something called an energy bar, but any similar organization to ours will have events and programs that you can attend. As far as students go, I think that it's a little bit tough, but I would say, because sometimes startups don't advertise things till the last minute. For us, we have an internship fair. There is, I'd say LinkedIn is probably one way that a lot of startups kind of put job posts out there. So I would go after that. If you find a startup that you're interested in, go check out who the founders are, reach out to them on LinkedIn, and, sometimes magic can happen.
So you mentioned that clean tech and clean energy are under fire. And I've heard you talk about, sort of defending clean tech investment as not being dead. And, we know that it's been a difficult area for VCs to invest in. Something that I've been really interested in is innovations you've made in partnering with corporates to help with funding and help with commercialization. And I believe much of that exists within the Greentown Launch program. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what's happening with startups and partnerships with corporates?
Yeah, so I think it's important to know that 2006, 7, and 8, so 10 years ago now, more than 10 years ago now, there was a big boom in green tech. Every investor wanted to be involved. A lot of those investors didn't know much about energy or environment or the amount of regulation or the amount of investment that would be required. And I think a lot of people got burned around the crash in 2009. And, that kind of happens in a boom and bust cycle. But after that, a lot of investors declared, and this especially, I think, happened on the West Coast, that clean tech was dead and that investment in clean tech was not a smart idea because you had to put a lot of money in and you were likely to lose that money. I kind of go back and question, were all those smart investments really? Did you need to build a factory in Silicon Valley? There's probably some learnings that could come out of that. In general, I think what we see today is investment is increasing again, but slowly, cautiously. And I think the entrepreneurs are a heck of a lot smarter and more scrappy. And the investors that remain in the area are smarter and they know their area. And so they are going to make smarter investments. The startups, by being more scrappy, what I mean by that is that they are being more resource efficient than they used to be. So instead of building your own manufacturing plant, maybe you partner with a manufacturer or a corporate partner to do some of that work so that you don't have to build so much upfront. And so that's, I think, the trend in the background there. In terms of our program, Greentown Launch, this was an initiative originally that came out of the need to really connect startups with a source of capital that wasn't easy for startups to access, and that is really corporate funding. So by corporate funding, a lot of corporate partners that we work with have venture capital funds associated with them. So you'll hear the phrase like CVC, corporate venture capital. Others have innovation groups who have been charged with identifying new innovations. And still others might have a chief innovation officer or someone that is kind of on the lookout for this and stuff. And it's tasked within the company that they need to work with startups. But a startup is maybe 2 to 3 people when they're real young, maybe 10. And then you're trying to really access a company that might be 100,000 people. Like, how does that work? They talk different languages. They are on different time scales in terms of their decision making. And a startup is often trained how to pitch a VC. And so you basically have your 10-slide deck. You draw the graph where it goes up in an exponential, and you say your market's huge, and you're done. Whereas to pitch a corporate partner, what you really need to do is understand their 3 to 5 year strategic objectives and understand how you and your product fits within those objectives. And that's a very different pitch. So there's a lot of kind of mismatch between those two partners. What we saw as the venture capital, as traditional venture capital moved out, is that corporate partners actually have moved in and started being interested in startups that are at an earlier stage. And so have filled some of that early stage capital need for what we would class as clean tech startups. The launch program that we have at Greentown Labs is really all about helping those partnerships be successful. And so it is one in which we work very closely with a corporate partner, say a utility or a company that is doing development of materials for solar. We've had 4 of these programs right so far, and we're running 4 more this year. The idea is that they have a particular technical specification or area that they are interested in looking at. And this is the corporate partner I'm talking about right now. We go out and do an international search in addition to looking right here at home within our own Greentown member community. And we find companies that are going to fit those specifications. Within that, there are maybe 150 companies that we come up with. Those are narrowed down to 4 or 5 or so companies that then go through a 6-month accelerator program. Now, this accelerator program is really, really specialized. I think a lot of people have maybe heard of an accelerator program. It's kind of like a boot camp that startup goes to kind of kick the tires on the business plan and find some advisors. For us, our accelerator, the Greentown Launch Accelerator, is really all about creating a successful corporate partnership. And so the companies that go through the accelerator Greentown Launch style are already pre-selected to be a good fit. And then during the course of the 6 month, we have a kickoff event. We also have a finale event. The kickoff, they are introduced to the community of mentors that we have available to help them fine tune on different aspects of their business while they go through the program. Then we have 3 workshops during the course of the 6 month. Each one are really all about trying to create a structured engagement and supportive environment for the corporate partner and the startup to work together. And so what's key is that it's not one person that the startup is interacting with. So it's not just the corporate venture capital person. It's actually the innovation people. It's the business unit heads. It's probably a C-level person at some point. And that is what's needed to make a complex sale to a corporate partner. You can't just have one person. There's internal selling that needs to go on. And that's something that is often, missed when you just say, well, I got a partnership with GE. Well, yeah, that's because there was a whole bunch of people in GE that were part of that process. So the program is really all about creating structured engagement for the startup and the corporate during that 6 month time period to get them to a place where they really know each other. The team has been vetted. They typically the startup will have milestones during that program that they need to meet. And so the corporate partner gets to kind of see how they do with those milestones. And as well, they're getting some training around doing complex sales, around IP, and around other topics that's really important when you're working with a larger corporation. And by the end, we typically see within 6 months, and this is a really fast time scale for a corporate partner, that we get 70% of startups who go through the program in some kind of partnership. And that can be a venture investment. It can be a licensing deal. It can be that the corporate partner becomes a customer. So a purchase order. There's lots of different potential outcomes, a joint development agreement. But basically, we're trying to make that partnership happen and be successful, because for this type of startup, they are typically going to need at some scale, in order to scale, that partner. And so if we can help facilitate that, then we are helping to scale that startup's technology faster to where it can really get out into the world and make a difference. And, that's kind of the most important thing of all, is that this technology get out into the world where it really can have an impact.
That 70% success rate is amazing, and it shows that the model's working. And I wonder if we can sort of end with you talking about, what do you see as being most needed? Which opportunities, which technologies? And I know it's like choosing your favorite kids. I'm not asking you necessarily to pick specific.
That's good, because I'll never do that.
Not asking you to pick specific technologies as winners, but I'm just, look, we are in a battle to save the planet right now, and I'm curious as to which technologies, which types of advancements we need to make the biggest impact right now. What do you think is most important?
Well, the thing that immediately jumps to mind for me is energy storage at various levels. Whether you're talking about utility scale or you're talking about household scale, that is something that we basically need to enable other technologies that are already deployed to make renewables more viable for more different environments and conditions. So that's kind of the one that jumps out. But I think, the important thing for me is that there's not, and I've really thought about this for years, is I think I worry when we try to find one technology that is going to be the solution, because I feel like there are so many technologies that we're going to need. And even if they all contribute something, we're moving forward. And so I think we have to think of this as a portfolio of solutions that we need. And all of them who are getting us towards reducing carbon emissions and helping us to really change the way that we currently live our lives today, moving us towards that energy transition that we need to have, I think it's going to just take a lot of different technologies that are complementary to one another. And so, beyond energy storage, which I think is just a general enabler, I'd say that we need to have many, many irons in the fire, and we need to do it quickly.
Before I let you go, I have to ask, you've mentioned energy transition as being really important to your work. You've mentioned, and I've heard you speak about the importance of community and bringing together, people that might be working otherwise in silos or in their basements. And obviously, you speak with such passion about the work that you're doing. Why do you do the work that you do? What's bringing you in early every day?
For me, there is a need to have an impact. So that's kind of the base level. But I think that what motivates me on a day-to-day basis is the entrepreneurs I work with, because I know how hard what they're doing is. I know the struggles. In a sense, I'm building my own company here. So, I am building my own company. I understand that what they're doing is hard, and it's also so rewarding. So when I have an entrepreneur come to me and kind of say, Emily, I'm like, what? And they're like, we just raised X million dollars. It's those wins that just grab you, and they make you feel like, oh, all that extra time that, I'm spending dealing with a situation in the lab or something else that might come up. It's worth it when you see the wins, when you see the smile on someone's face when they've been trying to do something that's so hard, raise money, come up with get by a milestone, sell their first product, achieve something in the lab. All of those things just really drive me. And so, they don't happen every day, but we try to celebrate them here at Greentown Labs. So we have a town hall that we have once a month, and we always ask for, what are the things you're proud of this month? What are the things you want to share? And, the whole community celebrates that as well, because what we're doing is hard, but we know we have to do it. And so we need to celebrate the wins, and we need to make sure the wins keep happening. And so, that's kind of what Greentown Labs is all about. And that's what drives me.
Emily, thanks so much for your time, and thank you for the amazing work you're doing. It's really important.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
The Sustainability Leaders Podcast is a resource of Jobs with Impact. Our engineer and associate producer is Ian Swanky. Theme music also by Ian Swanky. I'm David Rosenheim. If you like the show, please tell your friends and give us a rating and review on iTunes. See you next episode.